I just sat through 30 less than stellar horror movies, so damn it, I'm spoiling myself with a good one. And thus, I give you Tremors, a 1989 creature feature released by Universal Studios, the same studio responsible for all the classics, Frankenstein, Dracula, The Wolfman, and of course, Jaws. It stars Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward as Val and Earl, two hired hands,
Handyman Earl,
who do a bunch of odd jobs in a small desert town called Perfection. It's a small town. The population is only 14, so it's the perfect setting for a horror movie to take place. After literally getting shit on, Val and Earl decide it's time to leave Perfection for good, and on their way out, they find an old man stranded on top of an electrical tower. Val goes to get him down when he realizes the man died of starvation.
You mean he sat up there 3 or 4 days? He sat up there and just died of thirst?
They come across other bodies and alert the townspeople of a possible murderer present.
get the hell out of here! There's a killer on the loose! What? A murderer, man, a real psycho! He's cutting people's heads off!
As they try to make their way back out of town, their truck gets caught on something, and this is where they get their first look at whatever it is that's been killing people. Very much like Gremlins, the creatures in this movie evolve over time. It's one of the things that gets us to keep watching. Every 20 minutes it throws something different our way. The boys finally get attacked by one of these snake things, figuring that's all there is to this thing. Then a giant worm emerges from the ground, and they realize that the snakes were only its tongue, which it uses to grab onto its prey and pull it underground. After the full creature chases them to a trench, it crashes into the wall and kills itself.
Fuck you!
There's a seismologist named Rhonda, naturally, who uses her equipment to find out that there are 4 more of these things, all headed for perfection.
This valley is just one long smorgasbord. We have got to get out.
The second half of the film has the townspeople rallying together and trying to find ways of killing the creatures. The most prepared amongst them is a couple of gun nuts, Bert and Heather Gummer, played by Michael Gross and Reba McEntire, who make a standoff in their handy bomb shelter. This movie is really balls to the wall. I don't want to compare it to Jaws, but it has that same intensity. The dialogue and the characters might not be as strong, but the action and the suspense are on par. Look at that. No CGI, just good old practical effects. When we finally see the creature pop out from the ground, it's believable. It looks like something you'd see in Starship Troopers. We also see some pretty good visuals. At one point, it's able to pull down an entire station wagon, which the boys uncover the next day. Whenever the creature moves, we see the dirt shift on the ground, and anything in its path is affected by it. They gave the creature some weight that you generally wouldn't get with a computer-generated effect. Val and Earl work great together. They're a couple of everyday hillbillies. You completely believe their situation, and you root for them the whole time. As you'd expect, they're the heroes of the film. Earl's the older, wiser, more cynical one, while Val's the naive young apprentice.
You will have long blonde hair, big green eyes, world-class breasts, ass that won't quit, and legs that go all the way up.
Damn it, Valentine. You don't go for any gal unless she fits that stupid list of yours from top to bottom.
But both want the same things out of life, and it's fun seeing them bounce ideas off of each other. And when they can't make a decision, there's always a game of paper, rock, scissors to decide the outcome.
I guess when I'm your age, I'll forget what I eat too.
They're hilarious, and completely carry the film from beginning to end. The creatures get smarter as the movie goes on.
They dug a trap.
Going back to Critters, the reason why that movie doesn't work as well is because it's the same damn furry fuzzballs the whole time. No matter how many times these guys get shot at, get run over, or get blown up, they just keep coming and they never change form. With the graboids, yes, that's what they're eventually called,
Graboid!
They learn from their mistakes and they figure out different ways to get at their victims. It keeps the film fast-paced and suspenseful. I highly recommend this one. It's the best damn movie I've seen this month, and one of the most well-executed B-movies around. Now you're probably saying, that's not fair, this is a big Universal film, so of course it's going to be better than all those low-rent direct-to-video movies we just sat through. Well, that's why I also have to bring up the 3 direct-to-video sequels. Uh-oh, direct-to-video. This can't be good. Tremors 2 Aftershocks came out in 1996. Right off the bat, the 2 big-name stars from the original, Kevin Bacon and Reba McEntire, are nowhere to be seen. That's strike 1, right? Well, Reba McEntire actually didn't play a huge role to begin with, and Val gets replaced with Grady, a young city kid obsessed with graboids.
It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Bassett, sir. I'm probably your biggest fan.
Traditionally, the newcomer to a series is never as good as the person they're replacing. But I have to hand it to actor Chris Garton. He carries the film pretty well.
Told you.
I forgot.
He's actually a little more eccentric, and if you can believe this, more naive.
But for you, getting those worms would be a piece of cake.
Who are you? And why are you so dumb?
The movie centers around Fred Ward's character, Earl, who experienced a little fame before running out of money.
You only get one of those in life. Then I blew it. On goddamn Big Bird and his scrawny girlfriend!
It turns out that the Mexican government has been running into graboids and offers Earl a bounty of $50,000 apiece. It's just like Alan Grant in Jurassic Park 3. Of course, Earl is skeptical, but he brings along Grady and a box of explosives and he's all set up. At first we don't see a lot of the graboids, which is usually the approach with direct-to-video sequels. Traditionally, that's really disappointing, but with this movie it works because, once again, the characters play well off of each other. The humor is back in full force.
Man, he better keep quiet. Yep.
And when we eventually see some graboids, they're all done with practical effects. The first part of the film just has Earl and Grady running around the countryside blowing up worms, racking up the cash. At one point, they even call in Earl's old buddy, Bert, who's more than happy to help out since his wife left him.
Yes, I mean, the Federalists offer you anything you want. You guys take one case of dynamite?
Which is great, because he was the more eccentric character anyways.
I am completely out of ammo.
That's never happened to me before.
Then the movie takes a turn. One of the graboids appears to get sick, and when the boys go to investigate, they find out that something came out of it.
It's a whole new ball game.
That something is a bunch of little ferocious death chickens, and like their big cousins, they have their own set of rules. They sense their prey through heat seekers, and when they eat, they reproduce. For the most part, these things are also done with practical effects, although on occasion we get CGI when they have to move fast. The CGI actually isn't that bad, and it never hurts the suspense. Again, all the characters work together to figure out how to outsmart the creatures. It's plan after plan. They're stranded in a remote area with no ammunition, so they constantly have to find new ways to survive. It's a heart-pounding thriller. This was actually the first one I saw, and when I found out it was made for cable, I was baffled. This is one of the best direct-to-video sequels I've ever seen. I don't know if it's as good as the original. The new creatures aren't as threatening as the graboids, but the characters are still fun, and it's highly enjoyable.
I mean, I've done this before, and I did not like it.
So how's that for a direct-to-video sequel? Then we got Tremors 3, Back to Perfection, and as the title implies, it goes back to the town featured in the original film. Basically, it's the same Tremors film, but without Kevin Bacon or Fred Ward. Michael Gross takes over as the lead, reprising his role as gun nut Burt Gummer. I never thought of Burt as an interesting enough lead. He played well off of the other characters and served more as a lifeline, entering the fray just as the characters needed him the most. Here, he leads a younger cast in the battle against the graboids. He has some of the same cynicism as Fred Ward before him for obvious reasons, but I think because he has the added bonus of having firearms at his disposal, he's not as helpless as Val, Earl, or Grady, and thus, there's not as much of a threat.
Any questions?
The other thing that just kills this movie is all the digital effects. I can understand using CGI to animate the Shriekers, but even the graboids are digital for this one. There are some practical effects, but it seems like they really relied more on the CGI, and for the most part, it looks terrible. Look at this guy, he barely looks like he's part of the scenery. You can tell he was composited in, and it completely detracts from the suspense. A classic example of how bad CGI can really hurt your movie. The young sidekick this time around is Desert Jack, who earns his living running a graboid theme ride. A lot better than that stupid dead celebrity tour in Leprechaun 2. He's likable, but he's actually kind of laid back, so he's nowhere near as interesting as the younger leads in the prior films. Because it takes place in perfection, there are a lot of cameos from people who were in the first film, but you probably wouldn't know unless you were a huge fan. They don't do anything interesting, and a lot of the time the film abandons them so we can focus on Bert and his party. So in the last film, the graboids became Shriekers, which is the name given to the heat-seeking chicken things. In this film, the Shriekers somehow mutate into a third incarnation, Ass Blasters.
Sounds like a porno film.
They're essentially the same thing as Shriekers, but they can light their own farts, and they have the ability to fly. Unfortunately, the Ass Blasters don't do a lot in the movie, and they're disposed of pretty quickly. This one still has its moments, but it lacks everything that made the first two movies so enjoyable. It's still ambitious for being a direct-to-video film, but the characters just don't carry the movie that well, and the digital effects are too distracting. And finally, we have Tremors 4, The Legend Begins. An appropriate title because this one's a prequel. It takes place exactly 100 years before the original film in the familiar town of Rejection. Okay, the name needs some work. After some miners are killed by what we assume are graboids, the mine is shut down and the townspeople get a visit from the mine's owner, a supposedly rich tycoon, Hiram Gummer. Yes, Burt Gummer's ancestor, played by Michael Gross himself. As in Tremors 3, Gross carries the film, although as Hiram, he's a little more interesting because he knows nothing about artillery and he's a total ass.
What happened to the gingerbread?
I ate it, of course.
But I thought you said I could
A
have...
word of advice, young man. Anyone can be taken advantage of, and if you can, do.
Hiram hires what leftover mine workers he can find to kill the creatures when they meet up with the monsters. This is when we realize that they've actually been facing precursors to the graboids, these flying worm things. When the miners get killed, Hiram turns to more desperate measures and hires a gunman. At this point, the little dirt dragons are now full-grown graboids. The gunman is not prepared for this, and of course, he gets eaten. With the people of Rejection fearing for their lives, they prepare to leave town when Hiram comes to their rescue with a bunch of artillery he bought from the neighboring settlement. Like in all the other movies, the townspeople make their last stand in order to kill the remaining graboids. Essentially, it's the same movie with the Wild West motif. Now, I've pointed this out before. Whenever a low-budget movie attempts to go for a period piece, albeit in space or in the Wild West, it always seems like most of the budget goes toward the intricate set pieces. Of all the Tremors movies, this one feels the most underwhelming because we hardly ever get to see the creatures. It worked for Tremors 2 because you had some witty banter being exchanged between interesting characters. With these last two films, the characters just don't stand out, so we have some dry spells before we get any monster action. The thing that really hurt Tremors 3 was all the digital effects. Usually direct-to-video movies are guilty of delivering subpar CGI, that's nothing new, but there were certain things that flat out didn't need it, like this shot of a graboid popping out of the ground. Would it really have been that hard to build a model graboid for some of these scenes? Tremors 4 goes back to using mostly practical effects, although again, there are some digital enhancements in certain scenes that just weren't necessary. Look at this scene with the graboid. The snake tongues are all digital. They look terrible because it's so clearly obvious that the digital effects aren't matching up with the real-life model. Why couldn't they just use practical snakes like they did in the first film? And yet, later, when the snakes reappear, they're puppets again. Effects aside, this is probably the weakest entry in the series, but again, like Tremors 3, it has its fun moments. It's fun to see Gross's character transition from a naive snob to a compassionate, gun-toting lunatic, and the characters aren't unlikable, they just don't really have anything interesting to say. Despite all that I've said about the last two installments, the Tremors series is still hands down the best horror series I've seen this month. They aren't exactly scary, but the first two are suspenseful, and I can't stop thinking about Jaws when I watch them. They get redundant after a while, but they're all pretty entertaining. If you want your creature fix and Critters just didn't do it for you, you might want to give this little gem of a series a try. Happy Halloween, folks. Hope you enjoyed 31 days of slashers. Now go get some candy.